Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Payroll and HR, Expert Tips and Guidance. My name's Alice, and I'm going to be one of your hosts and presenters for today, which is actually just one of the 5 webinars in our National Payroll Week series, and that started on Monday the 2nd of September. And if you attend at least 3 out of the 5 webinars this week, you will earn our fantastic National Payroll Week digital badge, but more on that in just a moment. And as promised, a little bit more on National Payroll Week. So we had our first session yesterday, all about breaking down the payslip and what that's all about. There was some really interesting historic facts about payslips as well, which Duncan popped in. We've got today's webinar as well, Navigating Payroll and HR, plus 3 more sessions this week, which Duncan and I will be presenting. So lots to enjoy. And if you do attend the quiz on Friday the 6th, as a token of our appreciation, anyone who participates will automatically be entered into a prize draw for the chance to win a beautiful hamper. So why not have a go? We would love to see you there. And you can test your payroll knowledge with different rounds of questions themed towards the kind of webinars that we've run this week as well. And speaking of webinars, let's go back to today's session. So the content that we're going to be covering today is going to be related to absence management, but primarily focusing on sickness, AWOL, and what to do when someone is experiencing last-minute childcare issues. And although we don't seem to have had much of a summer, it is actually currently raining in Newcastle, and we will be looking at small business summer pain points and some frequent scenarios with a few more unusual ones thrown in as well. That is what we're going to be covering today. And let's introduce ourselves now as well. So as I said, my name is Alice. I am a learning facilitator here at Sage, specialising in webinars. You might have seen me presenting some of the Sage 50 payroll sessions as well. And I'm also joined today by some very special guests. I've got Advisor Plus HR business partner Jane Bradshaw Jones and her colleague, Senior HR Advisor Jack Jones, to share their extensive employment law expertise and to share their views on some common issues that you might experience. So it's over to you guys.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I've been in HR for 17 years, working in a range of sectors, including retail, banking, construction and rail. So we're really looking forward to giving you an insight today into some of the key areas that every business faces. So I'll also pass you over to Jack to introduce herself. Jack.
Hi, my name is Jack. So I've worked in HR for 6 years within industries including the UK holiday park resorts, an airline and warehousing. I have a level 3 and a level 5 CIPD, and my role as a senior HR advisor means that I work on the advice line supporting with clients with their ER needs, covering topics such as the ones that we're going to discuss in the session today, along with disciplinary, grievance, flexible working and so on.
Thank you very much. So yeah, let's move on with the content then. We will start with absence. So it's over to you, Jack.
Sure, thank you, Alice. So let's start with a subject that many businesses face on a day-to-day basis, and that is absence. So if we're talking sickness absence, we can split this into 2 areas. So this would be short-term sickness absence, whereby an employee is absent from work for short periods of time, which can be anything from 1 day up into a month in duration. And the other is long-term sickness absence. So this is where an employee has been absent from work for 21 or 28 calendar days or 4 weeks or more. However, this is company and policy dependent. Now, in terms of looking at triggers for sickness absence, these could be, let's say, 2 occasions within a 3-month rolling period. It could be 3 or more occasions within a 6-month rolling period. Or if you're a business that uses the Bradford factor score, then this could be 100 points or more. And for those of you that do not use or know what the Bradford factor is, this is a formula which is commonly used in HR to measure employee absence by taking into account total number of occasions, total number of days against a 52-week period. And this will include long-term sickness absence occasions. But again, it would be best for you to check with your specific policy and procedure. When speaking with an advisor on the advice line, we will help assess any potential risk by looking into reasons for absence. For example, if the employee has a known long-term underlying health condition or a disability, then we may have a discussion with that manager about potentially considering enhanced triggers. And this would more than likely be in conjunction with support from occupational health if we feel that this would be beneficial. However, I would say, please note, every case is different. And if you are ever unsure, it is always best to raise a case and discuss this with an advisor on the advice line.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, and Jane, I'm over to you as well. So what should an employer do when their employee first returns to work?
Thank you, Alice. So for short-term sickness, good practice is that when you know when an employee is due to return back to work, arrange who will meet them to welcome them back into the business and hold that return to work meeting. So the primary reason for holding a return to work meeting on the first day back is to assess whether they're actually fit to be back in the workplace and to also see whether they need any support after their period of absence. It should be done in a confidential location and the prep work should be done in advance. It should never feel like it's being done in a rush or that it's just a box ticking exercise. The return to work meeting is also to understand if any triggers have been met. So just as Jack has just described there earlier around the triggers, and then you will also explain to the employee what the next stage of the process is. So that could be informal management, putting it forward to an absence review meeting, or if no trigger has been met, to make them aware where they sit within that process. It's also a good point to note that knowing your team is really important. So if you feel that someone isn't being themselves, whether that's physically or within their behaviours, have an informal check-in with them. Understand what's going on with them and see if you can make any adjustments there and then, rather than waiting until an employee calls in sick. This shows that you care and shows your support as well too.
Yeah, it's a really good point to raise. So if you feel that something is brewing underneath the surface, why wait until it actually turns into an absence? You may as well get in there early with those discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. But if an employee continues to be absent, this may then fall into long-term sickness. And although for some absences, it's unlikely that you'll know how that will play out longer term and what the end result will be, it's good to know the whole process that your business puts in place, so you know how each stage then leads into the next stage. Just want to talk around communication. So communication is really key throughout the whole process and throughout any process. So along with communication, it's really important that you document any discussions or any attempts at contact that you make with the individual. So you've got them if you ever need to refer back to them. So with communication, consider what regular contact without bombarding an employee looks like. And don't forget that the onus can be put on the employee to keep you updated rather than you as a manager calling them day to day. So the first thing you'd want to do is understand the reason for the absence and understand whether there's anything that can be done to help them back into the workplace. Any adjustments that can be accommodated are called reasonable adjustments. And the key word there is reasonable. So this could be something as simple as moving somebody's shift back or forward by an hour, which won't cost the business anything, all the way up to providing specialist equipment. Reasonable adjustments or any changes are specific to an individual, so please don't assume that what you've done previously for an individual will be suitable for the next person. When you're considering what is reasonable, it's good to document why you can accommodate a reasonable adjustment, but also if you can't accommodate certain things, so a good business reason should be documented there. So progressing on from that, if somebody is unable to return to work in any capacity or any suitable role for the foreseeable future, a full review should be carried out and along with supporting medical evidence. So the ultimate aim for any business is to get the employee back to work to their original role or an alternative role. But unfortunately, we know that this isn't always possible. And if all options have been fully and genuinely considered, you may have to move to potential capability dismissal. Given that somebody is off longer term, they may be classed as having a disability, therefore carries additional risk.
Thank you, Jane. And yeah, it's never easy to think of dismissing someone, but fortunately it does happen.
It does, but as a leader, you can influence your impact on a person and your support through the process. So ensure that you're really clear on what the process is, keep communication flowing, and understand when to reach out for additional support too. So linked to absence, I just got a couple of other areas that I just want to go through. So the first one is, what if somebody falls ill during their holiday? So employees who fall sick directly before or during a period of pre-booked annual leave are entitled to take that period of time as sickness absence and then use that repaid holiday allowance at a later date. However, there are considerations about how much leave you can carry over. Equally, if an employee has hit an absence trigger from this period of sick leave, the normal process would apply. So another question is, so what if somebody falls ill while abroad and unable to return? So the usual absence process should be followed. However, you may have to accept contact via email or text message or WhatsApp rather than a phone call, depending on where they're located on holiday. But this should be discussed with the employee on the first contact. We will talk about this one later too, as unfortunately it's not an uncommon scenario.
Thank you, Jane. And Jack as well, this one's for you. So what other absence issues might a business be facing, in particular during the summer months where resource might already be tight?
Yeah, okay. So if the absence relates to another reason that isn't sickness absence, so for example, childcare issues, then there are various options that could be looked into. One of these is unpaid parental leave, which is where parents have the right to unpaid time off from work when they need to look after their children. Eligible employees can take unpaid parental leave to look after their child's welfare and, for example, let's say to spend more time with their children, look at new schools, settle their children into new childcare arrangements, or maybe even just to spend time with family, such as visiting grandparents. Employment rights, such as the right to pay, holidays, and returning to a job that are protected during unpaid parental leave. Parental leave is unpaid, as I've mentioned. An employee is entitled to 18 weeks leave for each child or adopted child up until their 18th birthday. The limit on how much of parental leave each parent can take in a year is 4 weeks for each child, unless the employee agrees otherwise. Parental leave must be taken as whole weeks, so for example, 1 week or 2 weeks, rather than individual days, unless an employer agrees otherwise, or if a child is disabled. An employee does not have to take the leave all at once either. A week equals the length of time an employee normally works over 7 days. And employees must give 21 days notice before their intended start date. If they or their parents are having a baby or are adopting a child, it's 21 days before the week of the baby or the child is expected. Employees must confirm the start and the end dates in their notice. Unless their employer requests it, this does not have to be done in writing. But if you're ever unsure, please do check with an advisor on the advice line. And then another thing that I'll cover is time off for dependents. So this is separate to parental leave. Time off for dependents is where an employee may take time off work to deal with short-term, last-minute emergencies involving someone who depends on them. So an employee's dependents could include people as husband, wife, civil partner or partner, a child, a parent, a person who lives in the household but is not a tenant, a lodger or an employee, and or a person who relies on them, such as an elderly neighbour. Now, the law doesn't say how much time an employee can take off or how many occasions. It just says that the amount should be reasonable. And if you're concerned about the amount of time that an employee is taking off, then you can discuss this with an advisor on the advice line and we can discuss appropriate next steps. There are other types of leave, which can include compassionate leave or unpaid special leave. However, to find out if they can take these types of leave, then employees should check with their employer. They should check what's written in their employment contract and also what the organisation's policy says, if there is one.
Thank you, Jack. It is some really informative guidance there. So shall we move on to AWOL next? Can you talk us through this, please, Jack?
Yeah, sure. So AWOL, which stands for absent without leave, is when a staff member fails to show up for work that do not have either annual leave booked or permission to be absent. When managing AWOL, it is important to consider as a business what is expected in terms of absence notification procedures. So, for example, you might want to say a colleague is required to call in at the beginning of their shift, let's say 1 hour before their normal start time to report their absence. Would there be a rule of around expecting text messages or emails, or in situations where this might be acceptable, is if there is an exceptional circumstance outside of normal working hours? And if this is the case, it's likely that the business would accept a text message or an email in the first instance, but would expect a telephone call during working hours for the manager to obtain an update from the employee regarding their absence. If an employee is absent without permission, or annual leave booked, then it is considered as a misconduct issue. And I'll give you some typical guidelines when dealing with AWOL. These might include within the first 2 days, so that is the first 48 hours, a manager should attempt to contact the employee to obtain a reason for their absence. So they might try to call them, for example. If there's no answer, the manager should leave a voicemail and follow up with a message asking the employee to get in touch as soon as possible. On the second day, I would also advise that a manager adds into their voicemail and their message that if no contact is received from the employee, then the next step will be that they will attempt to contact the employee's next of kin, as we find that this can usually provoke some kind of response, as they may not have spoken to their next of kin regarding their absence and they may not want them to know. If there is still no contact by the third day, then the manager should be considering contacting the employee's next of kin. And if their next of kin answers, then the manager should be asking them to make contact with the employee and ask that they request that they make contact with their manager as soon as possible. And it is particularly important in this circumstance that the manager does not disclose any potential confidential information to the next of kin relating to the absence or the situation, because they may not be aware. If there is still no contact by the fourth day from the employee, then the manager should consider sending out what's called a request for contact letter. So this would give the employee a reasonable amount of time to make contact with the manager to explain the reason for their absence. The case would then progress onwards following this, if no contact is received, to either inviting the employee to a formal meeting, whether this be the first and only formal meeting or the first of 2 formal meetings. Ultimately, if the employee does not make any attempts at contact and or doesn't provide any reasonable explanation or mitigation for their period of unauthorised absence, then an outcome could potentially be dismissal from the business. However, I would just like to re-emphasise that this is only an example of a timeline to manage someone who is AWOL and will differ from business to business. In some businesses, consideration could be given if someone is in their probation period or has less than 2 years service to dismiss sooner. And if someone is in their probation and the policy allows, then this process could be shortened.
Thank you, Jack. Some really great guidance and advice there. And on that as well, just thinking of some other potential emergency examples, what happens if an employee goes on holiday abroad but is then unable to return to work? Jane, I'll come to you for this one.
Thanks, Alice. So 2 examples spring to mind for this scenario. So the first one is where somebody is abroad and falls ill, meaning their return to work has to be delayed. So we briefly covered this one earlier, where we said that the usual process should be followed for calling in, although we may have to accept text message or email communication. So in addition to this, if it's a prolonged absence lasting more than 7 days, you can ask your employee to provide a non-UK medical certificate, which should confirm the reason for the absence and timescales for recovery. Also with that, with online translation services now being so good, if the certificate is not in English, you can look up the reason via the internet, or you're well within your rights to ask for a translated footnote if you need that. The second example is where an employee is abroad and has a delayed or cancelled flight or return journey home. So the approach would depend on a couple of factors here. So how long the delay is and whether it was feasible for them to return to work in the first place, such as if the original flight was due to land at 7 a.m. and they were due to start work at 9 a.m, were they ever going to make it to work anyway? So that should be considered. Further to that, you should also consider whether there is any doubt to the genuine nature of the delay. So you are okay to ask for evidence of the original flights and also the delayed flights if there is any doubt at all. If this then shows that the employee isn't being truthful and actually that flight was never going to return back to the UK on time, you could take that forward to full investigation and potential disciplinary. Just to highlight at this point here as well, so there's no obligation for a business to pay for the absence where there's been a delay to return a return back to work due to a late flight. However, if you're able to accommodate last minute holidays, this could be an option, or alternative to that, unpaid leave.
Great, thank you. And talking of holidays as well, absence over periods of stretch, for example, I know holiday season in the summer holidays can really impact a business. So what can be done in preparation? And Jane, can I come to you again on this one?
Yes, of course. So you're right, it's a really tricky time of year for lots of businesses. So it's where most employees want to take some time for either themselves or to cover childcare or to go away with friends. So it's important that you look at a previous year to assess the level of any unplanned absence before you even open your holiday window for the next year. If a business has had previously high levels of unplanned absence or sickness or any other impact, you may want to reassess the amount of people that you have off at any one time. It's also really important to look at absence records and understand if you've got any repeat offenders. So just an example I want to share with you. So when I was a student many years ago, there was an individual who went absent for the same 2 weeks in the summer every single year. So coincidentally, this was the same time as Wimbledon. and she was a massive tennis fan, but this was never picked up upon, and she was never it was never discussed with her. So she continued to do that year after year. It's not about catching anybody out, so it's just about having an open conversation with an individual to say, I've noticed for the last 2 years there's been an issue around the first 2 weeks in July. Is there anything that I can help with now to put in place to support you? That might just be enough of a conversation. So this will also show that you're willing to help where you can, but also acknowledges that you know that there's a potential pattern forming. And this informal supportive chat can sometimes be enough to prevent the same absence going forward. Summer can also be a difficult time for people to juggle work and home life, and can genuinely impact a person's well-being. So this can be for a number of reasons, such as organising childcare for 6 weeks, the financial impact of this, or for some with underlying medical conditions, it can be the heat which impacts their ability to concentrate or to carry out manual tasks. You may also have the key players in the team that just seem to cope year in, year out with these periods of stretch, and they just seem to manage. But once again, don't assume. Continue to have regular check-ins with those individuals as well to make sure that they're doing okay.
Fab. Thank you so much, Jane. So moving on to the questions then, just a reminder that you can submit your questions across to the team. We do have some time to answer these live. We have had some questions in the back kind of as we've been going along. So the first one is, when someone is absent, how many times can you contact them, and what type of questions can you ask about their illness? And Jack, can you take this one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So that's a really good question. And what I would suggest is we would always look at what is reasonable. And I'll give an example. So if somebody's off with a broken leg and unable to carry out their role, you wouldn't accept them to ring on a daily basis with an update, but maybe weekly would be appropriate so you can understand how they are from a physical and mental well-being perspective. I guess it also means that they then feel that you were thinking about them, and also you could provide them with any updates that you might need them to, maybe business related updates. So, weekly would probably be most appropriate in that situation. I would say that if somebody's off for a short period of time, so say 2 or 3 days, then for example, you may want them to check in with you daily to update. I guess in theory as well, on the back of that, is you can ask any questions that you want to understand the reason for absence, how long it is likely to last, or whether is there anything that they can do to help support them back into work. In all scenarios, I guess, especially for sickness absence, never just assume, as this could do more harm than good in terms of seeking updates. And when you ask questions, always then listen to the response. But if, like I said previously, if you're ever unsure, then the advisors on the advice line are more than happy to give examples and review any potential questions that you might want to ask for updates on absence.
Great, thank you. And the next one that I've picked up as well, so is about temporary or seasonal staff and what to do if they're unperforming. This one's for you, Jane, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So some organisations do heavily rely on temporary or seasonal staff during certain times of the year to manage workload. You may take these on directly or via an agency. If there are any issues with absence, conduct or performance, you should address these straight away. And if it is via an agency, contact them and explain the situation and have that discussion with them. However, if they're directly employed by you, hold an initial conversation with the individual about the issues that have arisen and clearly outline your expectations going forward. You should also assess whether they have received the adequate training to complete the role, and whether it's actually realistic for them to provide the same output as experienced employees, but this will all depend on that job role. If the issues are too severe or impactful, understand what your policies state about terminating employment.
Thank you, Jane. There's actually another couple come through for you in the chat as well. So if I just start with this one here. So we've got someone ask, I would like to check that the first 7 days of sick leave is self-certify, and is the employee entitled to SSP for those 7 days?
Yep, I'll take that one. So yes, absolutely. It's 7 days, but to qualify for statutory sick pay or SSP, as you might see it noted down, so an individual must be classed as an employee and have done some work for the employer, earn an average of at least £123 per week, and have been ill for more than 3 days in a row, that includes non-working days. So you might see the 3 days, also known as waiting days. So not necessarily paid for those 3 days, but there is that wait time. Interestingly on that, it's as part of the potential labour reform. So I think we should keep an eye out on that one.
Yeah, we definitely will. Thank you. And there's another question coming as well. So we are looking to change the current company that handles our OH referrals. Are you able to point out the best way or website to do this?
So we work with a number of occupational health occupational health providers, and we work with some really, really good ones. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to disclose which ones we would recommend or suggest. However, what I would really look into is what your expectations are from the output. So process-wise, it's generally pretty similar for every occupational health provider. So consent, meeting with a practitioner, and then you get that report. But it's understanding what is around that support. So do they offer EAP? Is it are they offering physio? Anything else that you would probably find personal to your business. So if you work in a warehouse, for example, physio is probably a really good one to ensure that OH also provides. So it is all company dependent. So apologies, I'm not allowed to recommend certain companies, but there's a lot out there. But before you go looking, it's understanding what is best for you and your business.
No, that's some really great guidance. Thank you, Jane. I think there's a couple here to direct to you as well, Jack, if that's okay. So the first one is dependency leave unpaid leave?
So generally speaking, time off for dependence leave would be unpaid because it happens in a short-term emergency circumstance. What I would also suggest is if you're ever unsure, it's best to check with company policies and procedures and what's written in employment contracts, because it could be that there are other forms of leave that could be used in this situation that are paid. For example, compassionate leave. However, I would say generally speaking, time off for dependence, and obviously, like we've covered, is unpaid parental leave are unpaid situations of absence for domestic leave.
Thank you. And there's another one as well. So what do you do if a person who is off sick refuses to answer the phone, won't phone in, and the only communication is sending in a fit note and very minimal response to emails? Long-term absence of 4 months so far.
Okay, so generally this is not unfortunately uncommon where somebody goes off. I guess part of it depends on the reason for absence. So if you considering somebody that's gone off with mental health, so it could be stress or depression related, then in the first instance, obviously, when a manager is reaching out to the employee to get updates on their absence, there should be a discussion there around how often they're going to catch up, who's going to call who, and in what form of that communication is going to be. So that might not be telephone. Sometimes it could be an email, maybe every Friday, or it could be a text message every other day to update. If in the absence of that happening, so in this case where somebody's gone off and they're just sending in fit notes and very minimal updates, then it would be great to refer to the company's procedure in terms of dealing with long-term sickness absence, because it will generally start with things called welfare meetings or informal absence review meetings. So inviting the colleague to attend the meeting in the first instance, generally around when they've been off for a month or so, seeking an update on their sickness absence through that meeting. If they don't attend and they let you know that they're not willing to and they're not comfortable to attend, then it might be that we seek support from occupational health in terms of assessing whether they are fit to attend a workplace meeting or not, or other ways to facilitate that meeting. So, as opposed to coming in for a face-to-face meeting, you might do it over the telephone or you might do it virtually. Just relaying back to what Jane mentioned previously, these would be considered as reasonable adjustments to help facilitate these types of meetings. And I guess really in terms of how then the business progresses with that is that obviously they continue to try and arrange conversations, facilitate meetings, rearrange them if they haven't attended, try to work through the process. But as it does go on, and if it's continuing the way it is and it's getting complex, then that is when you would pick up the phone, especially to the advisor on the advice line, and we would discuss in depth more around the situation, the background, the reasons for absence, what's been done so far, A timeline is always great as well to keep track of the contact attempts that have been made and the meetings that you have tried to arrange or reschedule. And then at that point, the advisor and the manager would discuss appropriate next steps following that.
Great, thank you. No, that was a really great answer there. I can see some more questions coming in, so we'll just take a little look at these. Do you want to see if you guys can answer any of those ones that have come through? And don't forget, you still do have about 10 minutes or so until we will wrap up the questions. So if there is any that you want to ask, submit those and we'll see if we've got time to answer them.
Yeah, just want to pick up on a point of clarification there. So just around SSP, so that is paid from day 4. So an individual is off from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The SSP will kick in from that Thursday onwards. So I know that was just a second follow-up question on that in the chat.
Fab, thank you. A couple of scenarios coming in quite long there.
Let me just take a look at this question here. So it says, we have a tricky situation. We have a member of staff off on long-term sick, unable to work, awaiting an NHS operation, which will help them, but making them unlikely to be fit to return to work. How do we manage this? Okay, so awaiting an operation which will help them, but making them unlikely to be fit to return to work. I guess in the context of if they would not be fit to return to work following the operation, then it would more than likely be required to have an occupational health assessment. It could be beneficial to have one before the operation, but if not, especially after the operation, so that an occupational health specialist can assess the recovery, how the operation went, and then be able to provide recommendation and guidance to the business on whether or not that employee is likely to return in some capacity at any point, because it could be in the report that you get back that they do confirm that unfortunately that employee can't return in any capacity for the foreseeable. And if that is the case, then the business will more than likely need to start undergoing some formal consultation meetings with that employee to discuss whether or not there is any alternative employment options or if there's any reasonable adjustments that can be made. You would also discuss the occupational health report and the recommendations that have come back from that. Is there any other medical specialist information that the employee can get, so whether that might be from their surgeon or their consultant or their GP, and all of that information would be looked at together in these formal consultation meetings, whereby sort of maybe after 1 or 2 of those meetings it could possibly end in unfortunate dismissal, but that is a case-by-case basis and would be something that you would discuss with an advisor on the advice line before progressing to those stages in that type of process. Don't know if there's anything more that you can add on that, Jane.
The only thing that I was going to link it back to what we discussed previously, if somebody has been off for a lengthy period of time, it's likely they'll be covered under the Equality Act as a disability, so it does carry some extra risks. So as Jack said, it's always best to seek guidance around that before making any decision. Yeah. Alice, there's one in the chat that's not related to what we've talked about already, but I think it's just an easy one that we can answer. So what is the correct way for someone to hand in a notice to resign? So in the ideal world, if somebody was to leave the business, they would compose an email or compose a letter with the reasons for resigning and also their leave date. However, that is in an ideal world. So we don't always get that. So people resign verbally, people resign in the heat of the moment, people resign via text message, all sorts of different ways. So ideally, you would want to understand why somebody's leaving and when they're leaving. So is it with immediate effect or are they working their notice period? However, as yet again, it's case by case basis. So if somebody resigns in the heat of the moment and they're citing an issue at the same time, you would want to explore that issue before allowing them to just leave the business. If somebody just says, I've got another job opportunity and I want to go, ideally, as I said, we would ask them to put it in writing, but there is no requirement for an individual to put that formally in writing. It could be verbally or it could be via text message or any other form of communication. So I hope that answers that question there.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful answer. There's another one just come up. I think you've assigned that to you, Jack, as well. So how would an employee provide a GP sick note if they're unable to get an appointment?
So if an employee goes off sick absent and they are cooperating with their manager in terms of they've had a discussion about the reason for their absence. They feel like how long they're going to be off for. So they potentially think I'm going to be off for like 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And they agree to maintain regular contact in the form of a telephone call every other day or an email every Friday update, for example. If it gets to a point after the 8th calendar day when obviously an employee is required to submit a GP fit note and there still is the absence of one, they've not been able to get an appointment, then we would generally ask that manager to keep encouraging that employee to try each day to contact their GP to book an appointment, to speak to somebody to be able to get a fit note. And I would give them a deadline. So I would say, obviously, it's a requirement for us to be able to cover your sickness absence. You need a GP fit note. And I would ask you to get this done by X date. And I would give them a reasonable amount of time, but obviously not too much time. So it could be 3 days from the time that you ask. Some businesses also have what's called a chase and fit note letter. So if that's the case, then it could be that this letter highlights, since this date you've been off sick absent, since this day I've asked you for a fit note and you haven't provided it to me, therefore your ongoing absence will be, for example, in some cases, you won't receive company sick pay, it will be statutory sick pay. That's just as an example that can differ from business to business. But generally speaking, if they are struggling to get an appointment, we would try to be reasonable in the sense of that we would give them a deadline which is reasonable. So you would try to give them a couple to a few more days to be able to obtain that fit note. And in the meantime, you'll obviously need to make sure that you're updating payroll to say that they're expecting to be off for at least 2 weeks. They will be obtaining a fit note and they will send a copy in as soon as they've been able to obtain one. I hope that answers that question.
No, really helpful. Thank you very much. Yeah, hopefully the questions and answers have been helpful. There is a couple coming in as well. I don't think we're going to have time to answer all of them. There are some more kind of, I suppose, Sage payroll related questions as well, which I will pick up after the session. But unless there's any which are jumping out, I think that is actually all we're going to have time for in the session. I think we've answered quite a few of them there, so do keep them coming. Like I say, I will try and pick up as many as I can afterwards as well. But yeah, hopefully you found some of those helpful, some really great advice from Jane and Jack as well. We have made it through a lot of them, but a few things before we actually start wrapping up the session as well. A little reminder that you can download the handouts from today's session, so all of the slides that we've gone through in the presentation with all of that information, all of the scenarios which we've gone through as well. We do have a printer-friendly version for you to make notes on, or a digital version which will have the kind of clickable links to the articles as well. And if you would like any help with anything that we've covered, please do feel free to check out any of the topics covered in the Sage HR advice portal. Or alternatively, if you are a professional or premium customer, don't hesitate to call the advice line as well. One of the consultants will be happy to provide any further guidance on any of the topics that we've covered today. And there is a link just at the bottom of that slide for that as well. And just to let you know as well, so alongside Sage 50 Payroll and the other products that we do offer other people solutions as well, such as Sage HR and HR Advice. So Sage HR enables you to automate and simplify your HR tasks. It does help you to manage your employees fairly and consistently, support productivity, well-being and job satisfaction within your workforce. And you can also trust that with Sage HR Advice, you will remain up to date with the latest employment law, HR and health and safety legislation, so it supports your business working within the legal frameworks and reduces the risk of tribunals and penalties. And yeah, so lastly, just a little bit more about the webinars as well that we run. So we do run webinars every week. It's not just a National Payroll Week thing. We run them on Sage 50 Payroll, Sage 50 Accounts as well. This month, of course, we've got the National Payroll Week webinars coming up, but also in September, we've got things like sick pay made simple. We've got maternity pay, paternity pay. There's also a kind of mastering mistakes and error correction session, which we'll be running as well. So if you do want to read a little bit more about those and get registered for them, head to sage.co.uk/webinars, or if you've downloaded the handout, you can just click on the register now button there on the right hand side. But with that, that does bring us to a close for today. Still a couple of minutes to go, so I'll leave the webinar open to see if I can catch any of those payroll related questions. But thank you everyone for your time this morning and for joining us today. It's much appreciated. And thank you as well to our special guests, Jane and Jack. Hopefully we will see you on another webinar either this week or in the not so distant future. But from us here today, it is goodbye for now.